Hello, everyone, friends. We're heading toward the weekly close in the markets, and before the week wraps up, the ongoing tensions in the Middle East continue to dominate the markets. After the rise in energy prices, when we look at the markets today, we can say that the markets have started to get used to the war environment a bit more. So honestly, the fear and panic selling have decreased, and the markets have found a bit of an opportunity to recover. We'll talk about all of these separately in a moment, but the rise in energy prices and the fact that they keep rising is a very important issue. We've discussed that oil has crossed a significant trend threshold and has entered a rising zone. With this move, households have also had the chance to see the impact of rising energy prices directly. There have also been increases in fuel prices, and without a doubt, we will see the inflationary effects of this in other areas as well, because it looks like the increases in oil prices will continue. And when we look at global markets today, we see that, just like in the US, other countries are also focused on war, and investors are adopting a risk-averse mindset. I saw in the latest data from the UK that they have revised their growth forecasts downward. I saw the declines happening in the Korean stock market. Or I saw that the Bank of Japan is showing more willingness to raise interest rates. But from a general perspective, markets in this period are not focusing on countries' data, but instead continue to watch for new developments coming out of the Middle East. And now, in the midst of these Middle East tensions, on a day when investors have eased up a bit on panic and fear-driven selling, what do the charts look like? And what are the trends telling us? Now, I want to talk about these things, and of course, I have things to share. First of all, I want to start with the oil charts. Look, there was a trend in oil that I've been following and discussing. Before the US and Israel came face to face with Iran, I told you about the presence of a falling wedge here. I mentioned that oil would enter an upward trend starting from the $55 levels, and that we would see clear evidence of this on the chart once it broke through $67. Today, when we look at the chart, we can now see this clearly. Everyone in the markets has started talking about the latest situation in oil, and for me, once the $67 level was surpassed, oil clearly entered an upward trend. And while this upward trend in oil generally brings about unease in the markets and panic selling by investors, on the other hand, if the rise in oil continues to be persistent, we will also see its inflationary effects. Look, this is a very important and complex issue. While the primary focus for European countries, the United States, and Turkey in recent months has been to bring high inflation down even further, this recent upward move in oil prices and the secondary trends it will create above $80 will certainly bring new inflationary pressures to the forefront. In other words, if these events in the Middle East last more than a few weeks, we can say that the rise in oil prices will become more permanent. This will be one of the most important issues in the coming period. When we look at the American stock market, after the recent sell-offs, we saw some recovery movements yesterday. On the weekly chart, it held the 23,950 level. So the American stock market hasn't yet confirmed a second leg down. In fact, it looks quite possible that it could climb a bit higher in the short term. But I haven't taken any new actions on the evaluation side here. Of course, we discussed these things on the YouTube membership side. I had mentioned that my positive outlook on Borsa Istanbul is stronger compared to the American stock market. There was also a correction move there, and I'll talk about that in a bit. First of all, the VIX index, which we call the volatility or fear index, has come down to the 21 level. We've seen a reversal from top to bottom. This is currently a sign that the markets have relaxed a bit more. We can say that if it rises above the 23 level again, it will open the door to new risks. And during this period, we've seen a time when investors have been accumulating more gold to be prepared. As of the weekend, we saw that investors made additional purchases. After these extra purchases, we saw gold being pushed down, just like the drop we saw at the end of January. If you remember, when it dropped from here, we saw scenes like a gold rush in the Far East markets. We saw lines in front of jewelry stores. Gold was quickly pushed down from there. The price went back up, and at the end of last week, in an environment where investors rushed in again, gold dropped once more. And if you ask what my general opinion is here, I still believe and argue that the trend structure in gold is strong. Here, the 4,800 level was a solid support zone according to my indicator. Right now, we can say that this area roughly corresponds to this zone. In my opinion, the $5,000 to $5,100 levels have become a solid support for ounce gold, and I think the upward trend will continue to be evident to ounce gold investors. On the silver side, the support level was previously in the $70 to $73 range. We can say that this is the area where it currently stands. So, with tomorrow's weekly closings, silver needs to close the week at the $84 level, which is where it is right now, for us to be able to say that it is still holding on in the positive zone. Similarly, for gold, it's enough if it manages to maintain its current levels with tomorrow's weekly closings. Enough for what? It's enough to open the door to new upward trends. When we look at gram gold, I also see that the strong trend structure in the indicators continues to be maintained there. Today, it's in a pretty strong zone within its current price range. In other words, while this area is a stronger support zone, we see gold trading above that today. If, with tomorrow's weekly closings, it stays above 7,300 Turkish lira, it's possible to see a much stronger upward movement, even in the short term. I don't believe that the problems happening around the world will decrease much in the coming period. Of course, short-term ceasefire proposals or promises like we're pulling back and so on can be made, but in the medium-term equation, unfortunately, it looks like these war conditions will continue. And when we look at silver's exchange rate against the Turkish lira, the 113 Turkish lira level is still acting as support. If it surpasses the 121 teraliter level in tomorrow's weekly closings, I think it will re-enter an upward trend and target 137 teraliters and above. And to sum things up here, there isn't any new news flow or any extra news coming from the Middle East in the markets today. Only the VIX index has started to pull back a bit, and the markets have started to relax a little. When we look at the screens today, we see some recovery and a bit of a move toward the positive in the US stock market, European stock markets, Borsa Istanbul, and even in the cryptocurrency market. Look, when we look at Borsa Istanbul, the fact that it remains below the 13,200 level in the area where it has fallen is not something I really want to see. So if it insists on staying in its current range and below this level, it looks like the trend will weaken a bit. But my hope and expectation here is that we'll see weekly closes above the 13,200 level tomorrow. I already have stocks that I follow and evaluate. You probably have some as well. I'm expecting the upward movement in Borsa Istanbul to continue. In other words, I'm waiting to see the second leg of the rally. We already experienced the first upward trend during the December period. Now, we need to see a new trend here. If we can't see it, then we'll talk about a trend where we'll need to take new actions or change our direction. I wouldn't just sit around for months waiting for Borsa Istanbul to go up. If prices aren't recovering here, if I don't see an upward movement in the index, after a while, I'll announce that I'm pulling out of Borsa Istanbul again. When we look at the cryptocurrency market, Bitcoin has reached the resistance area around 73,200. Last night, it tested this level, but it still hasn't closed above it yet. With daily closes above this level, it will have clearly entered a new trend zone. And I haven't even drawn a nearby resistance area in this trend zone yet. Bitcoin could continue to rise all the way up to $93,000 without encountering a resistance area. By the way, aside from this, there are also tax issues being discussed in the domestic market. Among these tax issues, it was announced that investors using local exchange platforms will pay a transaction tax of 0.03% on every transaction, whether it's buying, selling, or transferring. But the issue isn't very clear at the moment. If you're wondering what exactly isn't clear, there's talk of a 40% tax on transactions made through global exchanges. But this matter is not very clear either, and there hasn't been a full consensus reached yet. But if I may, I'd like to share my own humble opinion with you. It's not very easy for the government to tax your balances on global exchanges. In other words, it's not easy for them to know your profit margin or to figure it out. The only way they can find out how much profit you've made on your balances in both global exchanges and hardware wallets is by asking you directly. So they can only learn this through a declaration system. Otherwise, it's pretty much impossible. There's just this general idea of creating speculation here so that people don't use global exchanges too much, but instead use local exchanges, and then we can collect transaction taxes from those. I don't really think the steps being taken are the right ones. I would have expected more positive, reform-oriented steps to be taken. I'm still waiting. I mean, we need these things in order to move forward, to get better. And like I said, I don't think there's any real clarity on how they can tax crypto. I can't even say they have clear information when it comes to YouTube and content creators yet. I've had the chance to go and talk a few times myself, personally, and these are really new topics. Even the topics of YouTube and content creators are very new. And I've come across a lot of situations about this that made me smile. That's why the issue of taxing cryptocurrencies isn't so easy. So, if you ask me what my personal opinion is, I will continue to actively use global exchanges and hardware wallets. Of course, everyone has their own personal opinion. This is just my humble opinion. And if we look at the market, we can say that the recent movements in Bitcoin are promising. The current price range, in my opinion, is very promising. If you remember, after the $61,000 level here, I also removed the support and resistance levels. There is no resistance in these areas. I mentioned that the path is clear all the way up to $73,200. Bitcoin tested this level. It reached this level. Now, with this level being surpassed, I think it could go up to $93,000 without encountering any resistance zones. Of course, here the cloud indicator roughly corresponds to these levels on the weekly chart. As more time passes and we linger around here, we might even see this level drop down to around $88,000. But for now, at least, we clearly have this kind of open space ahead of us. And this situation also applies to other altcoins. Look, I'm also briefly showing the Ethereum chart. It has bounced off the support area and has started to gain strength in terms of price. On the daily time frame, it's also interacting with the cloud region. A similar situation exists for XRP and Solana as well. We've also entered a zone where Tether dominance has started to weaken. It's started to drop below the cloud region. We talked about these last night in the YouTube members chat. If you want more details and information, not just about the crypto market, but also about the local stock exchange, the American stock market, or the MTY markets, and if you want to get more insights and guidance for your investments, you can join us in the YouTube members chats. Other than that, there's nothing else to add for now. No matter what the prices are, I hope you're in good spirits. See you in the next video. Take care of yourself. Subscribing to my channel and turning on notifications is an investment tip for yourself, with the intention of bringing you updates before they even happen. Until we meet again,